Patagonia, the vast southern region spanning Argentina and Chile, has long captivated archaeologists and anthropologists with its rich trove of ancient human remains. Among these, skulls exhibiting unusual features such as elongation and dark coloration have sparked debates about human migration, cultural practices, and environmental influences. In the windswept lowlands of Argentine Patagonia, where the Rio Negro carves its way toward the Atlantic, a series of burials shocked early archaeologists and still intrigues researchers today. Among the scattered bones eroding from the dunes and lagoons, they found skulls that seemed impossibly stretched, their crowns sloping backward in a way reminiscent of ancient Andean elites from Peru and Bolivia. Elongated skulls had been associated with the high civilizations of the Central Andes, the Aymara of Bolivia, the Paracas of coastal Peru, and the Inca whose rulers wore their cranial shapes like badges of divine authority. Yet here, over 2,000 miles south in Patagonia, hunter-gatherer peoples with no pyramids, no stone fortresses, and no gold ornaments had also practiced the same radical reshaping of the human head. The discovery raised questions that have never been fully resolved. Why would mobile bands of Patagonian foragers bind the skulls of their infants to produce such striking forms? Were they imitating Andean traditions, or had this practice arisen independently in the southern cone of South America? And what can modern science, from osteology to DNA sequencing, tell us about the people behind these extraordinary remains? The first systematic descriptions came from Alois Hrdlicka, the pioneering Smithsonian anthropologist. On his South American expeditions in the early 20th century, he collected a series of crania from Laguna del Juncal in Rio Negro province. Catalogued into the United States National Museum, several bore inscriptions and were published in his 1912 monograph, Early Man in South America. Hrdlicka noted that while many skulls appeared recent, at least some were fossil-like and pre-Columbian, with Aymara-like deformation so marked that they resembled the artificial elongation familiar from Andean cemeteries. Argentine scholars, among them Robert Lehmann-Nitsche, described a cluster of these crania as black skulls, a term inspired by their darkened, mineral-stained surfaces. These remains, exhumed from older burials, seemed ancient to collectors, who debated whether they belonged to a long-extinct Patagonian race. Though modern radiocarbon dating places most of them within the last 2,000 years, their patina and form gave them an aura of mystery. These black skulls are among the most striking examples of dolichocephaly, or long-headedness, in the region. Measurements confirm deliberate flattening of the occiput and frontal bone, the hallmark of cradleboarding or head binding in infancy. The effect is not accidental. It requires constant pressure applied during early childhood, when cranial bones are malleable. That such a practice appears in Patagonia, far from the heartland of Andean polities, hints at cultural complexity often overlooked in the narrative of Patagonian hunter-gatherers. In the Andes, elongated skulls are strongly associated with social status, identity, and spirituality. At Paracas, south of Lima, tombs of the elite yielded dozens of elongated crania, sometimes wrapped in embroidered textiles of dazzling artistry. At Tiwanaku, statues depict figures with long, sloping foreheads. Chroniclers of the Inca noted that noble families practiced cranial deformation as a sign of prestige. Patagonia lacked cities and temples, yet the presence of elongated skulls suggests that ideas of body modification and symbolic identity transcended ecological and cultural boundaries. Among nomadic foragers, head shaping may have served as a marker of clan affiliation or a visible expression of belonging in a landscape where populations were sparse and groups needed to signal alliances. There is also the likely possibility of influence from the Andes. Trade routes carried obsidian, shells, pigments, and ritual ideas across South America. The Rio Negro Valley connected the Pampas to the Andes, and cultural practices could easily have spread with travelers. The similarity between Aymara-like deformation and the Patagonian examples suggests at least some degree of contact or imitation. Compared to unmodified Patagonian skulls, which tended toward natural dolichocephaly but retained rounded vaults, the deformed specimens stand out as the result of deliberate and prolonged shaping. Hrdlicka himself remarked on their startling similarity to Peruvian and Bolivian skulls, though he remained cautious, stressing that their antiquity was not great and that they likely represented relatively recent pre-Columbian traditions. In a significant recent study, researchers analyzed crania from Argentina. They found that early Holocene samples exhibited dolichocephalic traits, contrasting with later brachycephalic, or short and wide, skulls from the late Holocene. This discrepancy fueled hypotheses of multiple migratory waves into the Americas, an initial Paleo-American population with generalized non-Mongoloid features, followed by Amerindians with more specialized traits. Excavations at Laguna del Juncal reveal extensive cemeteries used by hunter-gatherers over centuries. Burials include both flexed and extended positions, with offerings of shells, pigments, and lithic tools. Within this context, the black skulls were recovered, their dark staining the result of soil chemistry and waterlogging in the lagoon environment. For archaeologists, these remains demonstrate that Patagonian groups maintained formal cemeteries and mortuary traditions, challenging earlier views of them as purely transient nomads. The deliberate reshaping of some individuals' heads adds another layer of ritual significance. If only certain families or lineages practiced the custom, elongated skulls may have been visual markers of leadership or prestige within the community. The elongated skulls of Peru, particularly the Paracas Peninsula, are perhaps the most famous in the world. Some are extreme, with cranial capacities estimated at more than 2,000 cubic centimeters, though this is largely a byproduct of the reshaping rather than true brain expansion. Burials at Paracas feature crania with long sloping vaults, often accompanied by rich grave goods, suggesting that head elongation was tied to elite identity. In Bolivia, particularly among the Aymara, cranial deformation persisted into historic times. Spanish chroniclers remarked on the unusual head shapes of local rulers, and Tiwanaku stone heads clearly display elongated forms. The Aymara method often involved frontal and occipital flattening, producing a tall, narrow vault, precisely the style echoed in Patagonia. The Patagonian examples are less numerous and less extreme, but the resemblance is undeniable. Indeed, a skull from Patagonia and one from Peru both exhibit the same flattened planes and elongated profiles. For early anthropologists, the similarity was startling, fueling speculation about long-distance migrations or shared ancestry. Today, scholars are more cautious. Rather than invoking lost civilizations or vanished races, they see the Patagonian skulls as evidence of parallel cultural developments, with possible influence from northern neighbors via trade and contact zones. For modern researchers, the most striking aspect remains the very presence of elongated skulls at the tip of South America. In a region long stereotyped as marginal and isolated, where hunter-gatherers hunted guanaco and ostrich under cold winds, we now know that people engaged in complex symbolic practices, shaping not just their tools and ornaments, but their very bodies. The elongated skulls of Patagonia tell us that identity was written in bone, visible for a lifetime in the shape of one's head. They connect southern peoples to a Pan-American tradition of body modification that stretched from the Andes to Mesoamerica, where Maya nobles also practiced cranial deformation. The revolution in ancient DNA analysis has begun to illuminate the ancestry of South America's first peoples. Studies of crania from the Pampas and Patagonia, including material from Laguna del Juncal, show that these populations were firmly part of the native South American genetic continuum, descended from the early migrations that entered the continent at least 23,000 years ago. In particular, genomic sequences extracted from human remains in southern Patagonia demonstrate continuity with modern Aonikenk, Tehuelche, and related tribes, while also sharing deep ancestry with populations farther north. These findings argue against sensational claims that elongated skulls belong to an alien race or outside migrants. Instead, they represent local peoples who adopted cranial modification as a cultural practice. Comparisons with DNA from Andean elongated skulls are still limited, but evidence from the Paracas and Tiwanaku regions shows that those populations too were indigenous to the Andes and part of the broader native South American gene pool. The implication is that cranial deformation arose independently in multiple regions, a striking case of cultural convergence, though contact and influence may have reinforced stylistic similarities. Further, A paper on maritime hunter-gatherers in western Patagonia found strong affinities with ancient Chileans, supporting a single entry via coastal routes. Y chromosome data echo this, with QM3 lineage dominant. Studies on extinct groups like the Selknam and Yamana from Tierra del Fuego, Patagonia, lack founding Amerindian DNA variants not seen elsewhere, confirming isolation but shared ancestry. Recent research evaluated Fuego Patagonian genomes over 6,800 years, showing demographic continuity with minor influxes from central Chile. This aligns with elongated skulls DNA. Paracas-like samples from nearby Peru yield native haplogroups, no anomalies. The black skulls from Laguna del Juncal also carry haplogroups C and D, linking to Pan-American founders. Overall, Patagonian DNA supports a swift peopling from Northeast Asia, with local adaptations explaining cranial variations. No evidence for multiple biological components. Instead, drift, selection, and culture shaped diversity. Despite more than a century of study, questions linger. Were elongated skulls in Patagonia confined to specific families, or did they represent a widespread practice? Were they adopted after contact with Andean traders, or do they represent an independent invention? Why were some skulls buried in the cemeteries of Laguna del Juncal blackened and fossil-like, while others remained fresh and recent? The answers lie in further excavation, radiocarbon dating, and genomic sequencing. Advances in stable isotope analysis may reveal whether elongated skull individuals had distinct diets or migration patterns. DNA could show kinship networks within cemeteries, clarifying whether cranial deformation was hereditary in practice, passed from mother to child, or open to all families who chose the tradition. The elongated skulls of Patagonia are a reminder that complexity is not confined to empires or monumental architecture. Even at the edge of the inhabited world, far from Cuzco and Tiwanaku, people engaged in practices that reshaped the human form and carried profound symbolic meaning. The so-called black skulls of Patagonia, with their mineral sheen and stretched profiles, are not relics of a vanished race, but the bones of indigenous Patagonians who lived, hunted, raised children, and buried their dead with care and meaning. Their modified heads connected them to broader traditions across South America and embodied identities we are only beginning to understand. In the end, these skulls whisper of a startling truth, that the urge to alter the body, to mold it into a vessel of culture and belief, is as ancient and widespread as humanity itself. From the deserts of Peru to the lagoons of Patagonia, elongated skulls remind us that the human story is written not only in words and artifacts, but in the very bones of our ancestors. Thank you for watching and commenting.